The world often watches the tragedy in Gaza unfolding and poses a single, pervasive question. How could this happen? The simple answers you hear from Israel's detractors, revenge, collective punishment, are just wrong. They are emotionally satisfying to some, but analytically useless. The hard truth is that this level of destruction was not merely a possibility. It was made inevitable. It is the direct result of a decades-long deliberate process in which Hamas, enabled by the international community, rewired the entirety of Gazan society into a singular machine, a war machine, a machine that made its own destruction, and by extension, the destruction of Gaza itself, the only path for Israel to defend itself. My name is Shalom Bar-Eretz. I'm a major in the IDF Reserves. I have degrees in sociology, political science, and international relations. Welcome to Causality, your guide to understanding world events. The news reports the symptoms. We provide the diagnosis. While complex events always stem from multiple contributing factors, this analysis will focus on one primary, overarching cause. And in this video, we will look at the forces that made this tragedy the only possible outcome. To understand the inevitability of Gaza's destruction, you have to stop thinking of Gaza as simply a territory that within it a terrorist group hides. Instead, think of it as a complex machine, one that has been completely and deliberately, step by step, rewired for a single overriding function, the destruction of Israel. Extending that machine analogy, we can look at the different levels in which Hamas has taken over the system. Let's start with the surface level. Hamas acts as the operating system, if you will. It runs the government, the ministries, the police force. It is the software that manages the day-to-day functions that everyone, including the international community, sees with and interacts with. These are not just empty titles. These are the institutions. These are the mechanisms of total control. They structure the way that every individual interacts with each other and the world. This creates predictable patterns designed to serve the regime. From getting a business permit to receiving food aid, every aspect of a citizen's life is mediated through and made dependent on Hamas. It provides the user interface, if you will, for Gaza. And this user interface is directed only to serve the purposes of Hamas. But its control goes much deeper. Hamas also has kind of taken over the BIOS of Gaza, the foundational programming of the culture itself. In Gaza, this means the ideology that Hamas has relentlessly installed for decades. It is a shared intersubjective reality where Hamas's power is legitimized and its goals are seen as the only noble path. It is loaded through the school curriculum that teaches children that martyrdom is the highest honor. It is reinforced through Friday sermons in mosques that preach jihad and rejectionism. It is in the summer camps that train child soldiers. This isn't just political propaganda. It is a deep and sustained effort to create a shared worldview where compromise is treason and violence against Israel is the highest moral calling. And this underlying structure ensures that Hamas is not just tolerated, but seen as the only logical and legitimate choice. Deeper still, Hamas rebuilt the very hardware of Gaza, if you will. It has co-opted the entire social and physical infrastructure of the Strip. This is the most concrete, physical layer of the machine. It is not just a tunnel under a hospital, it is a command and control center wired directly into that hospital's power grid and communication systems. It's why that hospital was built in the first place. It is not just a rocket launcher placed near a UN school, it is a school designed with reinforced sections to serve as a military outpost and a weapons depot. And underneath it all, a vast network of tunnels that have turned the very foundations of Gaza into an underground fortress. This physical, concrete landscape of Gaza became the body of the war machine itself. This is why you can't just uninstall Hamas. When everything has been built ground up to serve one single purpose, the entire system is a single integrated weapon. To destroy Hamas, the weapon it has created also must be destroyed. Hamas can only be removed without destruction if it were to go voluntarily, disarming itself, leaving the institutions, and evacuating the Strip on its own accord. Something which we have seen they have rejected wholesale, time and time again. And it doesn't seem that this prospect will happen in the near future. So how was this horrifying machine built in plain sight? It wasn't an accident, and it didn't happen overnight. It was predictable. It was incubated for decades. And a multiple of key factors have turned Gaza into this time bomb with only one result. Most critically was the constant cycle of international pressure that led to premature ceasefires. Think of it as a recurring script. Hamas would attack Israel, launch rockets, terrorist attacks, and Israel would start, perhaps, maybe attempt to dismantle their abilities. And like clockwork, the international community would demand a halt, would demand that Israel stop its actions, retreat, and let Hamas stay. But these weren't pauses for peace. They were years of quiet that Hamas used to weave itself deeper and deeper into Gaza's very civilian fabric, making a peaceful separation of the two impossible. Now, this created the illusion of conflict management. On the surface, it looked stable during the quiet periods, but it was all a facade. With every cycle, Hamas learned and adapted. They didn't use the quiet to build a state, they used it to make peace impossible. They used the time to dig more tunnels under hospitals and mosques, to build more hospitals and mosques for that purpose, to integrate rocket launchers into living rooms of apartment buildings, to rewrite the textbooks in UN-funded schools to glorify martyrdom. They have raised an entire generation that has known nothing but Hamas. Each internationally forced pause was not a step towards a solution, but rather a strategic gift of time that allowed the Hamas machine to become more deeply integrated, more complex, and far more dangerous. The world's constant desire for a quick fix prevented a real one, and with every cycle, the eventual cost of dismantling the machine grew. Part of this fantasy was the misguided international aid. For decades, billions of dollars from well-meaning nations poured into Gaza. This aid didn't help the people, it inexorably tied their fate to Hamas. Hamas, as the governing power, seized control of all distribution channels. Concrete intended for homes was diverted for tunnels. Money meant for schools was used to buy rockets and pay salaries. But this was more than just corruption. This was a deliberate strategy of state control. By becoming the sole gatekeeper of resources, of fuel, of medicine, of food, and of jobs, Hamas turned the population into dependents. To survive, you had to align yourself with their system. The world's generosity became a tool of oppression, funding the construction of the war machine while simultaneously ensuring the Gazan people could never break free from it. Their fate was fused with that of Hamas, all paid for by the international community. And another important piece of the puzzle was that time and time again, Israel deluded itself into believing that with enough gifts and concessions, peace was attainable. Or, at the very least, a manageable quiet. Under relentless international pressure, Israel constantly chose to prioritize short-term de-escalation and the flow of humanitarian aid over the strategic imperative of once and for all dismantling Hamas. This policy was rooted in tragic optimism, the belief that a monster can be appeased with concessions, that a ceasefire would lead to genuine transformation, and that economic incentives could somehow outweigh a deeply ingrained ideology bent on its destruction. This led to a pattern of allowing Hamas to rebuild and rearm, giving it the very quiet and resources it needed to metastasize into a deeply embedded war machine it became. All while telling itself the same story over and over again, that Hamas was deterred, that it had too much to lose, and that because of this, Israel was safe. The original sin of this folly was the 2005 disengagement. Israel then, under immense pressure, made an enormous sacrifice. It uprooted thousands of its own civilians, destroyed their homes and communities, and completely withdrew from the Gaza Strip. And what did Israel receive in return? Rocket fire, cross-border attacks. The disengagement was the ultimate gift. It handed Hamas a sovereign territory, a perfect laboratory to build and perfect its war machine. The vacuum Israel left was filled not with a nascent state, but with a fully realized terror fortress posed for the inevitable attack. Indeed, a central tenet of the disengagement's flawed logic was the assurance that Israel could always re-enter Gaza to deal with them at a whim, to degrade Hamas's capabilities whenever necessary, thus negating the need for a continued presence. This argument, still used by some, to claim that Israel can safely withdraw today and leave Hamas still in power in Gaza, proved catastrophically wrong. The withdrawal did not create a temporary safe haven for Hamas. Instead, it handed them an inviolable base of operations, allowing them to fortify Gaza into an impenetrable terrorist state. The ease of going in at will vanished, replaced by the reality of fighting a deeply entrenched enemy built on and within civilian infrastructure, ensuring that any future incursion would be exponentially more costly, both in Israeli lives and in Gazan lives. This is why almost everyone is to blame for Gaza. Whether it is the international community, the other Arab states, Palestinians, and even Israelis. Everyone, through either action or inaction, through malice or misguided good intentions, contributed to the creation of this horrifying machine and the strategic environment that left only one logical, albeit tragic, outcome: the inevitable destruction we witness today. Perhaps the only figures whose hands did not contribute to this tragedy are the ones who are to this day the most maligned. I'm talking about the Smotriches and the Ben-Gvirs of the Israeli right, their precursors, those settlers and the dismissed far right or extremists that the West loves to hate. The reality is that their unwavering, consistent stance through the decades that was ridiculed by many, dismissed as radicalism and hatred, was, in hindsight, precisely correct. They foresaw the horrifying conclusion from the outset, understanding that a policy of appeasement and containment would only allow Hamas to fester and grow. Throughout the years, their proposed policies, dismissed as radical, would have, if implemented, confronted and dismantled the problem before it demanded the catastrophic level of destruction that it needs today. Yet despite this stark validation by recent events, the prevailing narrative remains stubbornly unchanged. These figures, now proven prescient, continue to be dismissed, their warnings still framed as extremist rhetoric rather than the accurate analysis they prove to be. The lessons of their decade-long consistency is ignored, and the very attitudes that led to the current catastrophe persist in sidelighting the very voices that foresaw it. And that brings us to October 7th. October 7th itself did not justify destroying Hamas. Its true justification is that Hamas demonstrated the willingness and ability to commit such an atrocity, combined with an explicit promise to do it again and again. From a purely strategic and moral standpoint, Israel would have been completely justified in destroying Hamas and all that entails on October 6th and before. Doing so would have saved over 1,000 lives and prevented hundreds of hostages from ever being taken. The objective reality of the situation didn't change on that day. Rather, it was brutally exposed. For years, Israel and indeed much of the world preferred a comfortable ignorance. We built a system of conflict management based on a convenient fiction, the idea that Hamas was a rational actor that could be and is deterred, contained by a border fence, pacified with economic incentives. The policy was to mow the lawn, to periodically degrade their capabilities, and then retreat, hoping for quiet. This ignorance was bliss, because the alternative was too terrible to contemplate. No one wanted to go into Gaza. No one wanted to cause death and destruction. No one wanted to pay the price, either in Israeli or Palestinian lives. The hard truth, written in Hamas's own charter and declared in their leader speeches, was that their ultimate goal was not a state, but the complete annihilation of Israel. And acknowledging that truth, for all that it means, was to admit the necessity of a destructive, terrible war that no one had the stomach to fight. So the world and Israel chose an easier path. It chose to believe a blatant lie. Hamas's biggest mistake on October 7th was to make that truth completely unavoidable. The sheer barbarism of the attack wasn't just an act of terror. It communicated with a clear voice that Israel's destruction wasn't simply a slogan. It cried out loud and clear that it meant every word, and that they would never stop until Israel was completely annihilated. They took away completely the option of looking away. This attack forced Israel, against its will, into confronting a clear moral scenario. It is kill or be killed, and Israel could never allow itself to be killed. This all too predictable outcome is tragic, but the ultimate responsibility for it lies squarely with the ones who instigated and forced the lethal confrontation, not the ones forced to react. Hamas is the architect of this tragedy, by spending decades fusing itself with Gaza, by making the hospitals its headquarters, the schools its armories, and the civilian population both its human shield and its greatest support. It deliberately engineered a situation where its own destruction would cause immense collateral damage. They spent years perfecting this strategy, knowing that the world's media would focus on the effect, not the cause. But in doing so, they presented Israel with a binary choice. Option A, do nothing, absorb the massacre, and wait for the next, and the next, and the next, effectively committing national suicide. Or destroy Hamas completely, which, because of their ingrainment within Gazan society, means the widespread destruction of Gaza itself. Hamas pointed the gun, and Israel was forced to react. Yet even as Hamas has gone to such extreme lengths to maximize civilian casualties, Israel has nonetheless implemented unprecedented measures to save those civilians from that very destruction. The lingering question then is whether Hamas truly understood the finality of its act on October 7th, or if they too were trapped in a profound delusion. Did they comprehend that their barbarism would finally shatter Israel's ability to manage the conflict? Or did they believe that once again the international community's pressure and Israel's own desire for quiet and not wanting to harm civilians would lead to a swift, incomplete response, a mere mowing of the lawn, followed by return to the status quo? Did they genuinely anticipate Israel's commitment to their complete destruction, or did they delude themselves into believing the wool could be pulled over everyone's eyes one last time? Or did they actually truly believe that October 7th would be the catalyst for Israel's destruction, a spark that would reignite a regional conflagration with Iran's network and even perhaps other Arab nations dogpiling in, maybe finally achieving their ultimate goal through a grand decisive war which leads to Israel's ultimate end? That still remains unclear, but the horrifying images we see today are the direct and calculated result of that Hamas strategy. They engineered a choice where Israel could either accept its own destruction or be forced to destroy the machine built to accomplish it. The moral responsibility lies not just with the engineers of that machine, Hamas, but also with all those enablers around the world who, either through malice or misguided intentions, helped to create a monster that now must be destroyed in whole. So where does this leave us now? Taken together, all must realize that Israel's actions are not of revenge nor malice, nor of wanton destruction, nor genocide, nor ethnic cleansing, or any other of the motives that have been described to it. It is self-defense. It is doing the minimum that will provide Israel with self-defense for now and for the future. Hamas has raised the bar for that simple self-defense to such a level that it requires Gaza's destruction. If Israel's motive was revenge, then the world would be correct in saying that it has gone too far, that revenge has been fulfilled, that it can stop. But Israel's motive is not revenge, but destroying a threat to its very existence. And as long as that threat exists, Israel needs to and is justified in continuing. Gaza's destruction is not a sign of Israel's disproportionate malice. It is a tragic but logical outcome of a society being completely rewired for war. When a terrorist group yields the territory it controls as a weapon, fully taking over all of its components, the democratic country which that weapon is pointed at doesn't have a choice. True moral clarity requires us to look beyond the immediate effect and examine the cause. The comfortable ignorance of the past has to be gone forever. A return to something even remotely close to that status quo would not only be a strategic failure, but a moral one, a sacrifice of the soul for a peace that is an illusion. The challenge ahead is still immense, and it goes far beyond physical structures. But the same international community that bears so much responsibility for creating the monster and the disaster that is now unfolding should learn the lessons of the past, and not simply pick up old, tired ideas and try to present it as new. Rather, moving forward, truth must never be ignored. And whatever is the outcome for Gaza, the international community should either understand that fact or at least stay out of the way. The world demanded that Israel not deal with Hamas when it was a manageable threat, when dealing with it would not have entitled this level of destruction. The price for that demand is now being paid by all of Gaza. The question now is whether the world will ever learn that lesson. Thank you. This is a new channel. Anything that helps the algorithm, like, subscribe, leave a comment, would be huge. Again, my name is Shalom Bar-Eretz. I also give lectures. You can find my contact information through the link in the description below. Until next time, this has been Causality.